Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm John Berry 555, and I'm reviewing Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. So while I have talked about The Empire Strikes Back before in some YouTube shorts and in comments when talking about other Star Wars projects, I've never really talked about it truly in its own right in a full-length review. And that's true actually for most of the Star Wars films, so I am correcting that. Last week, I reviewed The New Hope, and before that, Rogue One. This week is going to be Empire Strikes Back, and next week is going to be Return of the Jedi, so stay tuned. But let's really dive into the film and discuss it. So, probably the most important thing to get out of the way first is that the original trilogy was not created with a cohesive narrative. Did George Lucas have things in mind? Yes. But he did not sit down, write out 3 movies, and then produce one every 3 years. No, that's more of the prequel trilogy. But still, despite that not being planned, despite what a lot of us Star Wars fans want to think, the ideas in this film do follow logically from the previous film. The Death Star is defeated, but the war is not over. The Empire is going to seek its revenge. Now, from expanded material, we know it's been 3 years, but in the context of the film, it could be anywhere from a month later to, well, maybe not a decade later, but a couple years later. And we've said it in the universe, canon and legends, I believe, are being about 3 years in universe time. And we get to see, the Rebellion growing. There's not really growing, but think of this. In A New Hope, the only rebel ships we see are some fighters. At the end, in this movie, in Empire Strikes Back, on Hoth we get to see some transports. And then we get to see, at the end of the film, the biggest rebel ship we have ever seen at this point. Now, yes, timeline-wise, bigger ships have been seen before. But in terms of what was shown on screen first, we've seen the biggest ship now, which we've now known to be the Nebulon B frigate. So there's that sense of scale there. We've also seen now the second biggest Imperial ship, too, with the Executor or Executor. I always like saying Execute. Some people like Executor. Regardless, that's a huge debate in the fandom that just like, is it Tantive or Tantive V? But that sense of scales with ships is actually something that Star Wars does really nicely. Introduce one ship, then introduce an even bigger ship, and then introduce an even bigger ship. And we do kind of get that. No, we saw how big the Death Star was because we saw how big the Star Destroyer was in relationship to the Tantive 4. And here, well, we see how big the Executor is because we see a Star Destroyer, which we have context from its size from the previous film. So, the reason why I'm bringing all this stuff up is to show how through visual language alone and background story details that are not maybe directly impacting the main plot, we are still getting a sense of time, of scale, of the different background factions, which all help create a real feeling world. But let's really take a look at the main plots. We have Luke Skywalker's story where he's basically training to be a Jedi, then confronting Vader and learning a horrible truth. And then we have Han and Leia's story, which is the love story of the film. Now, is it the best love story ever told in Star Wars? Probably not. Better than Anakin and Padme? Definitely. Maybe because it's not as toxic. It has its issues, mind you. There's a reason why they're separated in the sequel trilogy. But it's mostly because Han's a bit of a free spirit and, no, probably doesn't want to admit the better side of himself. So, he's still with the Rebel Alliance after 3 years. He hasn't gone back to pay off his debt to Jabba, and actually that does catch up to him in this film. But that was also they did in outside the universe in case Han Solo's actor Harrison Ford will not return for another film. But that is more of a side point to what the story being between the two. And that's basically Leia coming to realize that she does have feelings for Han, and Han learning to be maybe a bit more vulnerable with his own feelings and maybe be a bit more honest. Yes, when Leia tells him, "I love you," he says, "I know," and that's very much a Han Solo way of doing it. It fits his character perfectly, but it's also been him being more vulnerable. All throughout this film, basically he's hinting that Leia finds him attractive, but he doesn't find her attractive. But the truth is, he always did, and he just couldn't admit it until that end, which when she also admits it because she couldn't admit it to herself, and that's the main storyline going there. Could it be better told? I think so, and I think the comics and books do help explain and flesh it out a bit better. And Star Wars does definitely have better romances. Star Wars Jedi Survivor is one good example of that. But the point I did want to emphasize there is how in that story, it, like I said, it could be better. I think very much 80s in the storytelling, so it doesn't really give, a few sweet gestures here and there. That's all you need. Not quite proper build-up, but like I said, it's more cringy in retrospect, but still, I think, way better handled than the toxic mess that is Anakin and Padme's, mostly because of Anakin. But going back to Luke Skywalker, his story mainly involves around him being a Jedi. He crashes on Dagobah and meets Yoda, now realizing Yoda is being impatient, that gets Yoda concerned, yada yada. And Ben Kenobi's Force Ghost talks Yoda into, yes, giving Luke a chance, and Yoda trains Luke, and then Luke gets a vision of the future and goes off and ends up confronting Darth Vader. And is he ready for it? Not really. Luke loses. He survives, but he loses. But he only survives because Vader was never intending to kill Luke, only capture him and turn him to the dark side. And when capturing fails, Vader reveals the horrible truth that he is Luke's father. And what I really like about that scene is Luke denies it, and Vader tells Luke to search his feelings, it would be true. That's very much echoing what Palpatine tells Vader when Palpatine says that the offspring of Anakin Skywalker is alive. Now, Vader, we know from the comics, already knew this, but the point I want to emphasize there is that a little bit of a parallel there, that this familial relationship is being revealed via the Force, essentially, and the individual trusting the Force and sensing the truth. Now, we know from expanded material that Palpatine knows Vader and Anakin are one and the same. Vader knows that, obviously, and Luke learns it in this film, but the way it's presented in this film implies that Palpatine, the Emperor, Darth Sidious, doesn't know Anakin and Darth Vader are one and the same. Obviously not, but that's the way it was presented. I think it would have been an interesting story opportunity to actually have gone down that route. But it still, while they didn't do that, the way they did do it works very much because Palpatine doesn't want Vader to associate with Luke Skywalker, not Luke Skywalker, kind of, with Anakin Skywalker at all due to the threat of him remembering who he used to be. Still wasn't the best person, but definitely a much better person, let's put it that way. But with all that being said, overall, it's a great film. There's a reason why The Empire Strikes Back is ranked as the number 1 or number 2 Star Wars film by most fans, myself included, is because it has a solid story, it divides our heroes up in a way that contributes to their own character developments and helps us learn more about their characters, and it just has some great background stuff as well. The Tauntaun stop motion, well, yes, probably a bit dated in terms of technical feats. At the time, I'm sure it looks stunning, and even now, it still looks pretty good. Though I gotta admit, when I'm watching on my DVD copy or on my VHS, I notice it being stop motion a lot less, but watching on Disney Plus is much more apparent. But that I attribute to just more of how with modern technology they can clean up a lot of stuff, so things that were once hidden due to film grain that are becoming a little more noticeable to modern audiences, especially if you're aware of the specific filming techniques that were used in order to create the film. Another great thing from a filmmaking perspective is the crawl. Now, all Star Wars saga films have used the crawl, but it's a great way of getting some exposition, setting up the story without interrupting the narrative, because it begins at the beginning, it's exciting, it makes it feel grand, and it sets things up. And what little exposition they needed to do in Empire Strikes Back, it all feels organic. You have a Force vision, you have a character revealing a deep dark secret, you have a military briefing. Those are all natural in the world and thus don't feel out of place. A New Hope had to do a little more traditional expositions, but that was partially because not only were we new to the world then, but so was Luke Skywalker. He was taking his step into that greater world, and he needed to learn about it. And he got that from his mentor giving him advice. And that is done in a way that fits into the narrative, fits into the story, and not interrupts the flow. Interrupting the flow would be if we opened up the film with a rebel describing the events that happened to another rebel, or a recap. I'm not a big fan of the recaps that are done on the Disney Plus TV shows. I feel like that hurts the story. The announcements that they did at the beginning of the Clone Wars episodes were a great way of doing it because it fit in, it helped. It didn't seem as out of place, if you will. But that's another factor, another story for another video. But what I really want to get in is that I do think of the original trilogy, I think of most Star Wars films, I think The Empire Strikes Back is the most technically soundly made film. The pieces come together well. It just fits itself and is very well made. Yes, other films are exceptionally well made as well, but I do think The Empire Strikes Back is the best made of all the Star Wars films. And there's more I can discuss. I can talk more about small character moments, about Lando, who I haven't even talked about, and his little arc there, his own little way of trying to protect his people, trying to be responsible, if you believe it. And in the end, he decides, he gets to a point where there's only one thing to protect the people. Speak the truth, tell them to flee before the Empire takes full control. And man, does that remind me very much of Mon Mothma, and she got to a point where she had to speak the truth and full on rebel against the Empire in order to protect the people of the galaxy. And that is kind of fitting there, and that is my little connection to Star Wars and with this film. It's a small connection, mind you, but it's a neat, thematic, and I think fairly important connection that helps shows our characters and shows that Lando is more responsible than Han. Han stays because he likes adventure and he's deep down a good person at heart. Lando does the right thing because he exhausts all other opportunities to keep his people, to keep the people of Cloud City safe from the Empire. And that is where I want to end this review. There's more I can discuss. I can discuss how Leia kisses her brother, but they didn't know that at the time. And that ending shot is just gorgeous. I'm overlooking that. I think it's supposed to be it's debated, is there like a star forming in the galaxy, another galaxy? There's a bit of debate there, but that interstellar formation and then the panning out and we get to see basically a map painting of them. It's just gorgeous, and yes, it makes our heroes small as we pan out, but we see that they're part of this greater rebellion, which we've seen before. But here, like I mentioned at the beginning with the scale of the ships and how we've finally seen the biggest rebel ship we've seen so far. By making our heroes feel small in this big rebel ship, it shows the rebels are growing in their strength in their community and fighting the Empire. And that's that nice parallel there to what I mentioned earlier and everything that we saw in Andor, though Andor was made after all this. And because of that, this is retrospective things that we can apply that was not initially intended when the show was made. That's a long roundabout way to say Star Wars is good, The Empire Strikes Back is good. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching my video. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to give this video a like and share. Also, consider subscribing to my channel to stay up to date on all my latest content. In the meantime, thank you for watching, and as always, have a good day, a good night, wherever you are. May the Force be with you, always.